What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Nick 4K video. Today we're checking out a video from Looper, and their video is titled MCU Storylines That Will Never Pay Off. But before we hop in, make sure to hit that hype button. Apparently that helps my channel, so do that. I appreciate it. But with that said, let's begin.
What happened to Thanos' brother? Where's Hydra? And just what the heck was going on in Secret Invasion? You've got the questions, and we, don't have the answers, because nobody does. Many fans hoped that Secret Invasion would become Marvel's next big plotline following Avengers Endgame. Alas, rather than adapt the comics' huge crossover series for the big screen, Marvel scaled down the story and turned it into a pretty awful TV miniseries. Still, you can't say it wasn't ambitious, as Secret Invasion brought in major characters like Claret, the Super Skrull, and the Skrull villain known as Gaia. Gaia is given the powers of several Marvel heroes and villains, including Drax, Thanos, Hulk, Cole Obsidian, Korg, Abomination, Thor, Captain America, and Captain Marvel, and over the course of the story, she eventually switches sides. After allying herself with Agent Falsworth, Gaia then disappears at the end of the series, headed off to parts unknown. Like so many other MCU projects, Secret Invasion was clearly planned to set up further movies and TV shows. Because it was annihilated by reviewers and fans, however, it's unlikely we'll ever get a satisfying follow-up. Nevertheless, an alien hero with godlike powers leading an army of Skrulls alongside a British spy seems like too big of a story to just leave by the wayside, so never say never. Moon Knight was one of the most...
Okay, so my thoughts on Secret Invasion is I actually didn't watch it because I heard really bad reviews for it, and I saw a bunch of stuff for it. I was like, I'll check it out for myself one day, and I just never did. So I never actually watched it for myself. I do think that one day the MCU will do something where it's like, this is an Elseworld story. You know how they did that with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Like, it was one of those TV shows that you could watch, and you could consider it canon, but it wasn't actually canon. So my theory is for a lot of these other Marvel movies and shows that really failed and people didn't like, I do think there's going to be a level of, like, especially after Secret Wars, where they're considered like alternate universe situations or different universe situations. They don't actually tie into the main universe, and so therefore they can get rid of the more junky stuff. And if people like it, they can still consider it canon, but for the main canon, it's not actually canon. I could see them doing something like that, and I think Secret Wars is going to be one of those ones that they'll take and just kind of slot it into that other world or else world, whatever you want to call it, type of situation. So, yeah, it looked rough, though. It did look rough.
Exciting new Marvel projects in the last few years, not least because it finally introduced the supernatural world to the MCU. Known for his multiple divergent personalities, Moon Knight is nothing like Marvel's more mainstream heroes, as he often flits between hero, villain, and innocent bystander. Indeed, the final scene in Moon Knight properly introduced the character's hitherto unseen third persona, cab driver Jake Lockley.
Meet my friend, Jake Lockley.
The problem is, Moon Knight doesn't appear to be getting a Season 2 anytime soon. Marvel and Disney have since decided to rejig the MCU's format, placing less emphasis on big-budget streaming series, which has left Jake and his fellow personas in limbo for the time being. Yes, there have been some rumors that Oscar Isaac will return to play the character in an Avengers film or a potential Midnight Suns movie. Right now, though, the fact is that we still don't know what the Jake Lockley reveal was all about. And of course, a team-up movie is unlikely to spend as much time exploring Jake's character as a second season of his own show. Iron Man 2 gets a lot of criticism from...
Okay, my personal opinion on Moon Knight was I liked Moon Knight. I liked the fact that there was like a character who was like switching personalities. I thought it was an interesting concept to pull into the show. But I think ultimately the biggest hindrance to the MCU was Disney Plus. The introduction of Disney Plus forced Marvel to make shows for it. And a lot of these movies they had planned got converted into shows. And we've seen that with the Book of Boba Fett, the Obi-Wan show. I think the Obi-Wan show is probably the best example of it was supposed to be a movie, but instead they added extra hours and extra filler and fluff to make it a show. And I think we also saw that with a lot of the TV shows too. Loki was pretty good. I appreciated WandaVision. I did kind of feel like Falcon and the Winter Soldier was supposed to be a movie that they converted into a TV show, and I think that kind of made it worse. Secret Invasion was another one that kind of feels like that probably should have been a movie, or was initially planned to be one, and they converted it into a TV show. Could you imagine if they took Shang-Chi and tried to make a TV show out of it? It just wouldn't have worked as well, and I feel like Moon Knight kind of gets hindered because of that. So I would like to have seen Moon Knight as a movie, and I don't even know if they're even going to continue that storyline. They might just leave him out of the next Avengers movie altogether. But yeah, like I said, although Disney Plus is good for a lot of things, it also hindered a lot of creativity and actual quality too, because, you know, studios were focusing on TV shows and not just making a solid single movie. I don't know. I could be wrong about that, because I know some of their movies are rough too, right? But it just feels like that. And I kind of wish I could just look into an alternate universe where Disney Plus never existed. And, you know, all of these shows were just movies. And, or certain movies weren't canceled to make room for shows or make a budget for a show or whatever. It would be interesting.
Fans, and rightly so. The script was rushed, the villain is underdeveloped, and the movie spends way too much time on setting up future MCU projects. But it wasn't all bad. One of the more interesting aspects of the story was the idea of a technological arms race caused by Tony Stark's invention of Iron Man. In one of the film's early scenes, Stark tells a congressional panel that a number of foreign governments are about 5 to 10 years away from developing their own Iron Man tech.
Hammer Industries 20.
Since then, though, we haven't heard of any other country developing an Iron Man-style suit. As of Iron Man 2, North Korea and Iran were both attempting to do so, and if they were on top of it, then greater powers must surely have been doing the same. And yet, some 15 years later, it appears that the only person who successfully developed an Iron Man suit is Riri Williams. But hey, there's always Armor Wars, right? Right? The MCU's version of Hydra debuted in Captain America: The First Avenger, in which it was led by the dastardly villain.
Okay, so just to point on that one, I get where they're coming from, but I never really thought of that as like a future storyline. As far as like a alternate company coming up with an Iron Man suit, that's already been done. The villain in the first one, Jeff Bridges' character, he made his own Ironmonger, and then also the second movie is pretty much all about the villain making enemy Iron Man suits, right? So that's already been done. I don't necessarily think there needs to be a movie about that. I wouldn't be mad about it, but as far as Tony's story goes and the arcs he was going through, I think he's past that type of arc, right? He's now beyond that for sure. So he didn't need to do that, in my personal opinion.
Villain known as Red Skull.
Hail Hydra.
Though Red Skull met defeat at Cap's hands in the first Avenger, Hydra lived on. In The Winter Soldier, we learn that the organization went underground after the war, eventually infiltrating the highest levels of government. Even after being defeated a second time, Hydra turned up once more in Ant-Man. You shouldn't really be surprised about all this, of course. The clue's kinda in the name.
Cut off one head, 2 more shall take its place.
In Ant-Man, Darren Cross steals a bunch of Pym particles and sells them to a Hydra agent, who promptly runs off never to be heard from again. At the time, many fans assumed that this plot point would lay the groundwork for a future story, whether in an Ant-Man sequel or another MCU movie. Unfortunately, Hydra's Pym particles have never come up since. It's perhaps worth noting that Ant-Man director Peyton Reed once said that the original ending saw Scott Lang retrieving the particles before the decision was made to nix the scene and leave the plot thread dangling. Clearly, Marvel once wanted all this to go somewhere. Whether it actually will or not, however, remains to be seen. Eternals was one of...
I'll be honest, I completely forgot he did that. I haven't seen that movie in a while. I completely forgot there was that storyline. So, I mean, that could be interesting, like an evil Ant-Man. Maybe call him Spider-Man. I'm sure that name hasn't been taken yet. Okay. I could see a future Ant-Man story going that way. We'll see.
Of the most ambitious projects in the history of the MCU, led by a cast of major A-list stars and helmed by Oscar-winning director Chloe Zhao, the movie's story also changed the very nature of the MCU by introducing an ancient race of superpowered beings who have lived on Earth for millennia. Eternals opened up endless narrative possibilities for the franchise, but when the movie flopped both critically and commercially, Marvel put the kibosh on just about every plot thread it had opened. It took 4 years for us to get any real follow-up on the giant celestial poking out of the ocean, and there's a real chance that the post-credit scenes in Eternals may never get a payoff. This is despite one of them featuring 2 bona fide superstars making their MCU debuts. First, you had actor and musician Harry Styles, who shocked audiences by showing up as Eros, aka Star Fox, the brother of Thanos. Eros was also accompanied by Pip the Troll, who was played by actor and comedian Patton Oswalt.
What a pleasure to make your acquaintance, my fellow Eternals.
With such big names playing them, there must have been plans in place for Eros and Pip, most likely in some kind of Eternal sequel. But with no such film on the horizon and nary a peep about their involvement in Avengers Doomsday or Secret Wars, it's quite possible that we'll never see these two again. There's been a lot of chatter.
So I was told that, I don't know if this is still set in stone, but it makes sense. Effectively, every post-credit scene of all the MCU movies aren't like real. Like they're like teasers to a potential future, but not actually supposed to be considered canon. So anything post-credit scene, unless it's like an actual scene from the next movie or whatever, like we had Civil War with them catching Bucky in the one post-credit scene. Overall, post-credit scenes are considered to be like teasers and not actually like canon. So that's one of those ones where like they could finish off Eternals and just be like, okay, that was just a one-off movie. It's a different universe. Like I said earlier about Secret Wars, kind of putting it in its like own Elseworld universe, which I guess I'd be okay with. But I do kind of feel like they should consider it canon, considering, you know, the Celestial they turn into adamantium is probably going to be a big deal going forward in the MCU. So I don't know if they could just write off that movie, honestly. But to tell you the truth, I really did like the Eternals. I know a lot of people didn't. I know it's not traditionally Marvel, but I dug the deeper themes. I dug that it was trying to do something different. I like that, but I get it. Not everyone likes it, so that's fine.
About the possibility of Spider-Man and Venom facing off in the MCU. Sony's Venom franchise was a huge success for the studio, which led many to wonder whether these arch-frenemies would finally clash on screen. And Venom Let There Be Carnage teased just that when Eddie Brock was transported into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But that scene was immediately reversed in Spider-Man No Way Home, as Brock and the symbiote were transported back to their own world.
What is happening? No, we just got here, no!
If nothing else, though, a small piece of the black symbiote goo was at least left behind in the MCU, teasing the possibility that another character might one day join with the symbiote. So far, though, this hasn't happened. Granted, it hasn't been that long since all that happened, but the total radio silence over the symbiote plot point isn't exactly encouraging. Of course, it's entirely possible that the symbiote will tie into Avengers Doomsday or Secret Wars. After all, the original Secret Wars comic is where Peter Parker bonded with the symbiote in the first place. Failing that, Marvel Studios might just straight up wash their hands of Sony's largely disastrous universe of Spidey villains. We'll just have to wait and see. It's probably fair to say,
Yeah, like I said, post-credit scenes aren't canon, so that explains that one.
That She-Hulk Attorney at Law was one of the MCU's more divisive releases, with some fans lambasting the series even as critics gave it solid reviews. Some of these fans piled on the show's unimpressive CGI and focus on meta-comedy, while others simply didn't like the show's more serialized form of storytelling. There were also
I
plenty
like
of
the
head-scratching
Daredevil,
plot beats, a few of which
walk of
seemed to be
shame.
teasing something big, but like Eternals, the series' uneven reputation could mean we'll never see those beats paid off. One of these plot points concerns Emil Blonsky, aka the Abomination, who heads off to Kamartaj with Wong at the end of the series. Since that happened, we've had multiple projects that could have logically included or at least mentioned Blonsky, such as Thunderbolts and Captain America Brave New World, but those stories came and went with barely a mention of the character. Could he show up in Avengers Doomsday or Secret Wars? Anything is possible, obviously. Right now, though, it's impossible to know how Marvel originally planned to follow up on that scene. After Avengers Endgame, Marvel Studios faced quite the conundrum.
I'm pretty sure She-Hulk isn't canon. And if it is, I think it's supposed to be like, you know, from her perspective. So that's why it's zany. That's why it has like, it feels like it's a different story because we're not watching it from our perspective or from another character's perspective. We're watching it from She-Hulk's brain, right? So the story might not be 100%, you know, accurate. It's the same thing with like Thor Love and Thunder, how it's kind of from Korg's perspective. That's why it's extra zany, you know, extra silly. You know, these things didn't actually happen the way that we saw them, but it's from that character's perspective. Now, like I said, that could just be my personal opinion, but when you do that, you take a step back and you think of it from that perspective. It's something along the lines of like Deadpool. You know, the story isn't that silly, but because the story is told from Deadpool, you know, his brain is going to make things more funny. It's the, what's that term? The unreliable narrator. That's what it is. You know, they're narrating their own story, and the story is not 100% true because it's from their perspective and they're unreliable. I also do something similar when I watch the Hobbit movies, because Lord of the Rings movies are so good and the Hobbits are just kind of okay. So I look at those as if like Frodo was reading Bilbo's journal, and that's why the movie feels more mystical, more clean, because it's effectively Frodo imagining the story as he's reading it. And so that's why it feels the way it does. Where when he actually goes on his own adventure, that's real life. That's why it's more gritty. That's why it's darker. Now, of course, I could be wrong, and maybe they're not meant to be that way, but that helps my own headcanon to feel better for movies and shows that aren't as good if I'm looking at it from that perspective. So that's just my personal opinion. And I think if more people did that, She-Hulk, Love and Thunder, and maybe some of the other movies in the MCU that, you know, aren't necessarily loved or considered kind of bad, if you do that, it does kind of make them better. So there you go.
How do you top a villain like Thanos?
I am inevitable.
The answer was Kang the Conqueror, an all-powerful, time-traveling despot who stands shoulder to shoulder with the deadliest threats in the history of Marvel Comics. Kang was introduced on the small screen at the end of the first season of Loki, before several versions of him turned up across Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and Loki Season 2. Clearly, Kang was supposed to be the MCU's next big bad, forming the core of a two-part story that would have begun in Avengers: The Kang Dynasty. And then he vanished. Now, we all know the real reason why Kang was unceremoniously removed from the MCU, but how will the story itself deal with him? At the moment, nobody knows. We could get a throwaway line referencing his sudden downfall in Avengers Doomsday, or he might just never be mentioned again. Either way, the fact remains that Kang the Conqueror pulled off the most successful disappearing act in the history of the MCU. In the comic,
my theory is that one of these Kangs are going to change their face to look like Tony Stark, and then he's going to effectively kill all the rest of the Kangs, and then that's going to make sense why Kang is effectively Doom, and that's why he's so powerful. I don't know if they'll go that way, obviously, but that would be a really smart way to kind of just get rid of that whole plot line nice and easy, and also establish how powerful Doom is. I would like to see more Jonathan Majors. He got a bad rap. He shot himself in the foot. I heard he's actually rumored to be in Creed 4 again. Initially he was in the script, and then they took him out, and then he's back in. So it's gonna be cool to see him come back in that storyline, because I really think that but he got more steam. You know what I mean? Like, he's not done yet, so I'd like to see more of him.
Steve Rogers had two key love interests, Peggy Carter in his World War II days, and then, after he came out of the ice, Peggy's niece, Sharon. The MCU briefly alluded to a romance between Steve and Sharon in Captain America: Civil War, before promptly disappearing Sharon for a number of years. She was finally brought back in 2021's Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which for some reason revealed her to be an arms-dealing supervillain known as the Power Broker.
To government secrets, prototype weapons, you name it. Should be something for everyone.
At the end of that series, Sharon is given a full pardon, although she seems pretty dead set on continuing her work as the Power Broker regardless. Like Emil Blonsky, though, Sharon has been AWOL ever since, despite the MCU's narrative throwing up endless opportunities to continue her story. The terrorist group known as the Ten Rings made their debut all the way back in 2008, but it wasn't until 2021's Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings that we saw them at full strength. And the Mandarin didn't just give them that name because it sounds cool. He named his organization after a set of mystical rings that provide him with incredible power. At the end of Shang-Chi, a post-credit sequence reveals that the rings are emitting some kind of signal, but nothing has come of that since. The rings may have been intended to be relics owned or desired by Kang, as many fans have pointed out that they seem to use similar tech to that wielded by the Conqueror. But with Kang now removed from the MCU's future, it's possible we may never learn what that signal was, or if the rings were indeed connected to the multiverse saga's erstwhile big bad. There's no denying that Marvel Studios turned the concept of the post-credit scene from a one-off gag into something much, much bigger. With Eternals, though, the studio may have bitten off a bit more than it could chew, tossing out not one, but two scenes that may well never be resolved. In addition to the appearance and subsequent disappearance of Eros and Pip, Eternals features a scene in which Dane Whitman discovers a relic known as the Ebony Blade, which is the signature weapon of his comic book counterpart, the Black Knight. Before Dane can take the sword, however, he's stopped by the off-screen voice of Mahershala Ali's Blade. Since Eternals bombed in theaters, however, we haven't heard from Dane since. Meanwhile, development on the standalone Blade movie has become so fraught and difficult that it was roundly mocked in Deadpool and Wolverine.
There's only been one blade. There's only ever gonna be
one blade.
You're not wrong, Wesley. You're not wrong. In Thor: The Dark World,
okay, another point, like I said, post-credit scene doesn't count. It is a shame, though, because Mahershala Ali is a solid actor, so it would have been cool to see him in the role. And I like Jon Snow, right? So it'd be cool to see them, but post-credit scenes, so it's technically not canon.
Character got her own comic relief sidekick. Darcy Lewis, Jane Foster's humorous intern from the first Thor film, got an assistant to help her lug things around in the form of Ian Bothby. The two have a mildly conflict-ridden dynamic throughout the adventure before abruptly kissing during the invasion of London by the Dark Elves. Ian's role in the MCU was extremely short-lived. He, like Jane and all of Thor's Earthbound cohorts, did not return for Thor Ragnarok.
Sorry to hear that Jane dumped you.
She didn't dump me, I dumped her. It's a mutual dumping.
In the years since, however, Jane Foster has managed to land a comeback in Thor Love and Thunder, while Darcy returned in WandaVision as a full-fledged doctor. Yet Darcy made no mention of Ian. Their romance, and the character of Ian altogether, was apparently just not meant to last very long in this franchise. At the end of Iron Man 2, weapons...
What? Were there people actually wondering about where he went? What was that one? That wasn't... Like, no one cares? What? I didn't hear that one before. No. It doesn't matter. Who cares?
Manufacturer Justin Hammer is arrested by police officers. As this happens, he calls back to Pepper Potts that it isn't over.
I'm gonna be seeing you again real soon.
Perhaps that was originally the plan. MCU films don't just keep any villain alive and well, after all. Keeping Hammer alive and thirsting for vengeance had to be thought of as a way to set up future installments. However, for whatever reason, Hammer has not re-emerged in the MCU. Iron Man 3 had no place for Hammer, replacing him with Killian, while other movies starring Tony Stark, like Captain America Civil War, also found no room for him. The most peculiar part of this is that Rockwell's profile has increased substantially since Iron Man 2 came out. Having won a Best Supporting Actor Academy Award and getting another Oscar nomination in the same category, one would think Marvel Studios would be scrambling to bring him back. Instead, Rockwell's entire presence in this franchise has been limited to Iron Man 2 and a tiny cameo in the short film All Hail the King. Captain America: The Winter Soldier ends with a
I like Hammer, but I feel like his story's been told. He doesn't necessarily need to come back, in my opinion.
Genuinely interesting beat. After faking his death earlier in the film, one would expect Fury to just return to his regular day-to-day duties by the end of the feature. Instead, Fury makes the conscious choice to remain deceased to the general public. The viewer even gets a glimpse at his headstone in a Washington, D.C. cemetery. As Fury walks off-screen in The Winter Soldier, the possibilities for what he could be up to next are limitless. Strangely, then, Age of Ultron brings things right back to their original status quo. While initially Fury is depicted as someone who's been off the grid for a while, he's eventually shown to be manning a helicarrier in his traditional leather garb to help Sokovian civilians get to safety. Rather than a shadowy individual believed to be dead by most, Fury is once again a public figure that everyone knows is alive and well. It's a strange move that undercuts the ending of The Winter Soldier and all the narrative possibilities that Fury remaining dead could have brought. In the initial Guardians of the Galaxy...
So my theory on that one is that Fury went on vacation for a little bit, and due to the Age of Ultron issues, it kind of pulled him out of retirement effectively. And I think that was one of those things where he realized like he can't retire. You're just supposed to consider that. There's also that element of like at the end of Iron Man 3, Tony gives up all of his armors. He gives up being Iron Man. And then in Age of Ultron, right in the very beginning, he's Iron Man again. So there's that story happening in between movies, which makes the world feel more fleshed out, feels like it's more real. So I'm okay with it. I think it's fine.
Galaxy movie Xandar is an important planet. It's where 4 of the 5 titular superheroes meet up, as well as home to the headquarters of the Nova Corps organization, and the backdrop for Ronan the Accuser's massive final battle to execute his vengeance against the planet's occupants. Given all that, and the fact that it housed an Infinity Stone at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, fans might expect such a location and its characters, including Nova Prime and Roman Day, to reappear throughout future MCU adventures, particularly cosmic-based ones. Instead, the planet hasn't reappeared at all in subsequent films. The Nova Corps gets name-dropped in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, while Xandar also gets mentioned in Thor Ragnarok and Avengers Infinity War. That's the extent that this planet has factored into the franchise post-Guardians of the Galaxy, with even its destruction by Thanos happening entirely off-screen. Xandar started as a seemingly important place, but it's been largely brushed aside in the mythology of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Starting with the show's second...
Xandar is like destroyed now or something like that. I don't know. I don't necessarily need to see more of it. It served its purpose in the beginning of Guardians 1. I just don't really think it needed any more, in my personal opinion.
season, Bobby Morse was a critical part of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and its ever-expanding mythology. However, she and her love interest, Lance Hunter, eventually left S.H.I.E.L.D. in the third season episode Parting Shot. In-universe, they were forced to leave to keep Coulson and company safe. However, beyond these fictitious confines, Morse's sudden absence was done to allow herself and Hunter to headline a spin-off show entitled Marvel's Most Wanted.
They're not coming back. They've been disavowed.
What are you talking about?
There were no good options.
However, those plans hit a snag when ABC opted to pass on Most Wanted, leaving the two characters in a state of limbo. Though Hunter managed to return in a guest appearance capacity in a later episode of S.H.I.E.L.D., Morse remained MIA for the rest of the program's run. Part of this appears to be due to scheduling conflicts for actress Adrienne Palicki, who eventually found a lead role on the Fox sci-fi series The Orville. However, no official reason has ever been given for her sudden departure. Whatever caused the character's absence, a hole was left in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. mythology that kept all storylines related to Morse awkwardly unresolved.
Yeah, like I said, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't canon, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so there you go, guys. How do you feel about these? Did you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? I think most of these are just one of those things where if you worry about them, they're just pretty much not canon anymore, and that just fixes the issue. So I guess there's that. But there are some ones out there. So do you think they missed any? Let us know in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, to notifications for more. Make sure to hype this video. Apparently it helps, so I appreciate that. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you next one. Peace.